I heard a story from an institution that I won't name last week. A professor told the head of digital that her department didn't need an accessible website because she'd never met a blind immunologist. Apparently she then asked if they could make the text on the website a bit bigger though, because she couldn't see it too well. I'm Jonathan Trout, I'm the head of web strategy at the University of Edinburgh. I'm new to my role, I'm new to the sector. Turns out that university digital estates are complicated. I'm going to talk about our web estate first. I'm going to look at how we're seeking to be inclusive and compliant across our digital output, and then how we're trying to govern it. So just start with some numbers. We've got just under 1,500 websites, only one of which is the main university website. That's not including all of the externally hosted ones, which may be in the thousands. Over 1 million index pages, not including anything dynamic or behind a password or firewall. Large student body, lots of staff, 1 in 10 of whom have a login to edit the website. Yeah. So our web strategy lays it out pretty starkly on the front page. The estate evolved organically. It's the Wild West. There are gaps in the corporate knowledge. We don't know what's going on. We're exposed to significant risks. We could be sued at any moment. There is fragmentation in working methods, standards. We've got a bit of work to do. Of those 1,500 websites, about 70% of them running in this thing on the left here, which is EdWeb Drupal. That's our own Drupal 7 CMS. For the purpose of the chat, we're going to pretend that that's fine. The other side there, we've got several hundred websites not under central control, and many of those are actually high traffic sites that are really key user journeys. Now, there's lots of genuinely good practice on them, but with my sort of broader strategy hat on, there hasn't really been fully consideration about the full cost of that devolved ownership or the wider utilities and benefits of being on a central platform. Without going into all of it, even if we just look at compliance, you think of GDPR, you think of information security, and you think of the Equalities Act and the public sector body accountability regulations. So we tried to get a bit of a control over it. We worked with this company called Little Forest to start auditing our web estate, get an idea of what sites we have, what platforms they're on, who owns them, what business areas they're under. Start to get a little bit of a handle on what our risk profile is like. We're finding that making visible the risk of liability can be a powerful motivator. I'm getting a lot of phone calls in the last couple of weeks. And we even get to drill down, and you'll have seen other bits of software that does this, and give you point-by-point breakdowns of things that are potentially not AA standard. This kind of software has been a step change in us understanding our estate, but as been touched on before, these kind of automated tools aren't enough. You get too many false positives, too many false negatives. So how to respond then? We did look at running a full accessibility audit on our entire estate, all of our websites and applications. And we got this as an estimate. And that's not changing anything. That's just working out what's wrong. So an alternative approach was needed. Broadly speaking, this is what we're looking at. So replatforming, we've got a forced upgrade from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 in a little while, 18 months. We're going to take that opportunity to radically sort of rebuild the platform and to do it on the kind of the user-centered, inclusive design principles, which I'll get onto in a minute. We've got a major content audit that we have. I don't think we need 1 million web pages to tell our story and to complete our journeys. We're going to make the best use we can out of that automated testing, but we need to construct the processes that support it. Again, on a user-focused point of view, thinking about the key journeys. So if we're doing any kind of prioritization of what's left after we've sliced this down, how do you prioritize? How do you make the decision as to where you should put that hard testing first? That's going to be a big job, but it'll give us a slightly more sensible approach to that manual testing. We're shifting from a kind of the IT kind of projecty culture to more of a, what I call a digital product culture, one where we push the prioritization of our development resource closer to the users, and we have an inbuilt system of iteration. And we're going to work with the community to improve our policies and our ways of working. The kind of key idea for that, we think, is that if you devolve in practice, you have to devolve accountability. And that's something that hasn't gone hand in hand in the way we feel it should have done in the past. We're doing a similar kind of audit on our applications that minimize and prioritize. That's for bought in and in-house. We are doing lots of the manual testing. That's always going on. But fixing it at source is better. So we're revisiting our procurement processes and those design principles I mentioned. So all internal applications, including our website, make use of our global experience language, which, like everything else in Edinburgh, starts with ED. It's amazing. So this is a collaboration between our web comms, marketing, and development teams. It started off as just a web branding toolkit, but it's kind of expanding, and its long-term goal now is a consistent digital experience right across the university services, regardless of platform. So there's kind of guidelines and documentation. There's live code examples. There's the sort of a code agnostic framework in there, and it's all got WCAG baked into it. It's all 2 at the moment. We are moving towards 2.1. The plan is to continue to expand that over the next year. We've got a new platform coming in. We've got a new approach to web services. And as we break into these new areas like conversational interfaces, we see that its role is only going to really expand. It's been used in concert with our 9 digital experience design principles. I really don't have time to go into all of them, but the idea is that everything we build or write or shoot or develop is as user-centered as inclusive as it can possibly be. I think that emphasis on inclusivity rather than accessibility, so not just designing to the protected characteristic, but being inclusive throughout the process is really good, although building to WCAG would be a good start. But yeah, there's that general principle that good design is inclusive design. We've also been working with the ideas presented in Scotland's equivalent to GDS. One of the interesting things that's emerged from this, and we've got some people who are really good at UX, it's really important that your process is inclusive as well. Has anybody ever used post-its in a UX thing to denote different meanings, different colours? Like, yeah. That's not, yeah. We're also starting to get ourselves around this new international standard. Jonathan Hassel, who used to work with at the BBC many years ago, has been developing this, and this is sort of superseding the British standard 8878. This is about focusing how you embed accessibility considerations into your business as usual processes. So it's not this kind of reactive to legislation kind of idea. How many for time? I'm okay. I'm going to tell you very quickly about a couple of projects that tell you a bit more about the sort of the pragmatic sort of things that we're up to. There is more details of these kind of as case studies on our website. First up, this is a pilot scheme into video and auditing subtitle run by my colleague Anne-Marie Scott. So the university has developed and created an awful lot of video and audio content over the last couple of years, not least because we've got this new automated lecture recording program. For reasons you've heard already today and what you already know, subtitling is really important, not just for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also for people for whom English is not their first language, for people who need more time to understand things or just want to consume content in different ways. The perception is that this is difficult and expensive to do, and it is. But we wanted to explore whether we could run an internal service to take this on. There were 3 main threads. Anne-Marie said I could have her slides if I would leave this visual gag in for the 3 threads. Sorry about that. The 3 threads of the pilot were to directly improve the skills around subtitling and how we teach them, and also to kind of help shift the culture a little bit away from the idea of compliance to one of inclusion and empowerment, to establish whether we could employ students to do this, to see if that was feasible. When we looked at the costing outside, or with taking it outside, there's no way that the staffing would be making a living wage. We're a living wage employer. If we're paying people to do this kind of work, why not pay our students? And also to learn a little bit more about the state of the art of subtitling and where it's at. Automation, we found, gives about 70% accuracy. So human intervention is very much a component. One of the big factors in that is sound quality. I think we're now the organisation that owns the largest number of lapel mics in the UK. I don't know how we know that, but we know that. And catchable mics. I don't know if you've seen those things, big fluffy balls that you throw around the room. Really useful for getting the good sound quality in those things. One of the reasons for that low automated score as well, accents, specialist terminology. If you've got an international teaching staff and you're using lots of technical terminology, it's going to be a lot harder for those automated systems to pick it up. We found that the work is really attractive to students. They were absolutely all over it. They were able to work very flexibly, often able to enrich their CVs and work in related fields. There's people in journalism, people in linguistics who are really keen to pad out the CVs on this sort of thing. And obviously we know where our money's going, which is really nice. It's not cheap, but it's kind of comparable to commercial options. It works out about 15 minutes of work per minute of audio, give or take. But we think we get lots of benefits for that. We're looking now to kind of move this out, past this initial pilot, to train schools so that they can do their own content. Obviously, if you know your own content better, you're going to be better at doing that sort of automated working. We'll be running in phase 2 this semester. Quick chat about this one, Learn Foundation. So this is Learn's our VLE. We wanted to take a look at the content in that and see what the state of accessibility was. First thing we looked at was to standardise the structure of the output, the breadth and sort of depth and length of each piece of coursework was very different right across the university on different courses. So we wanted to find a way to standardise that, make them sort of an understandable chunk of stuff and have standard introductions and that sort of thing. So this was a big co-creation exercise we did with students and staff. Then we employed 10 students, there they are, to go through the content of 2,000 courses. We picked a sample of 12 pieces of course content in each of those 2,000 courses and ran them through 40 standardised accessibility tests. This produced custom reports for each school to give them specifics, and we're currently working on a set of general findings that will be going out to all content creators across the university and will be folded into ongoing training. This idea of ongoing training, this is what we're thinking in terms of our training generally, is that you don't put a course up saying accessibility training, because people won't go to a course saying accessibility training. You build it into all of your courses, and that's what we've done. Quickly, how we keep track of it. We formed around a year ago our web governance group, which is all kind of major stakeholders, the CIO, the Director of Learning, Teaching and the Web, heads of comms and marketing. We worked up a web strategy document, which I've inherited from my predecessor, which is awesome. Didn't have to write it. It was just developed through really wide consultation. It's a living document. We've got a new version coming out in a couple of months. There's also a new accessible and inclusive learning policy, which has come up, and we're working on a digital strategy project to align activities across the university. So we've got a number of pretty major strands coming up that we want to land in as a fairly coherent proposition in one go in a couple of years' time. And the idea is that we build that accessibility and inclusion into each of these strands as we go. Just some quick takeaways. Yeah, good design is inclusive design, and inclusion doesn't just mean protected characteristics. Liability and risk can be really useful. It's very good for motivating budget holders and for shaking people out of their comfort zones. It's worth making use of as long as you're aware that it's not the only reason to do things. Accept that you can't do everything about your legacy content, but find a consensus on what you can prioritise and be transparent, but obviously make sure you future-proof everything from now on as best you can. And lastly, yeah, look for creative ways to get the most out of what you have, in our case, students. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.